Along an autumn road lined with fiery red maples, a man walks in silence. Beside him, Kaiser, a German shepherd with a warm amber coat and eyes that never leave his closest companion. They once faced danger side by side in distant lands, and now journey toward an unfamiliar town carrying memories and a fragile hope. An abandoned train car, a boy's bright laughter, and a secret that has slept undisturbed for 30 years. What lies hidden inside that old train car, powerful enough to change their path forever? The autumn highway stretched ahead, framed by 2 rows of maples, shedding their leaves like they were scattering pieces of memories, long faded to gold. Charlie walked slowly, the worn canvas backpack slung over his left shoulder. Heavy not only with clothes and a few meager belongings, but with the weight of an entire life he had just left behind. Beside him, Kaiser, a German shepherd with a warm amber coat streaked with deep sable, moved with steady, confident strides, ears erect, glancing up at his handler now and then, as if to make sure he was holding up. Charlie had left his old town before dawn, when the streets were still lit by dim yellow lamps and every window remained closed. He'd left no farewells, only pausing briefly before the house that once was his, where peeling paint clung to the door and the lawn had grown wild. Memories surfaced unbidden, Lily's laughter ringing through the living room, his ex-wife's hand resting on his shoulder during quiet late nights. But all of it had fractured after he left the service. During his military years, Charlie had served in a rapid response rescue unit. Side by side with Kaiser, then just a young working dog, he had endured blistering desert heat and nights of pounding rain in the mountains, searching for and pulling people from rubble or floodwaters. Kaiser had been more than a partner. He had been the one steady light in hours so tense they seemed to choke the air. Yet life in the civilian world had not unfolded the way Charlie hoped. Budget cuts shut down the local rescue team within months, leaving him unemployed. Old injuries in his shoulder and knee made physical labor difficult, while desk jobs seemed closed off to a veteran without advanced degrees. Savings drained away. Pressure and disappointment seeped into every meal, every conversation, until his marriage dissolved. His wife left with Lily, and the house became a hollow shell thick with silence. Only Kaiser remained. The dog seemed to sense his loneliness, never straying from his side. On bitter mornings, when Charlie sat for hours on the front steps, Kaiser would rest his head on his knee. On sleepless nights, the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing was the only sound that pushed back the emptiness. Now, on the quiet road, their shadows stretched long in the early light. A man and his dog, bound by an invisible thread. Each of Charlie's steps felt like shedding a piece of the past, while each glance from Kaiser was a reminder that the present and what lay ahead still mattered. The rumble of an approaching truck swelled, then passed trailing diesel fumes and a rush of cold wind. Adjusting the strap on his pack, Charlie's right hand drifted to his chest pocket, where he kept a photograph taken the summer before he left the military. Lily with her arms around Kaiser's neck, smiling wide. Charlie standing behind with a hand on his daughter's shoulder. The memory slowed his pace, tightening his chest. The road opened into fields of faded gold grass, dotted with the occasional weathered wooden house, thin smoke curling from chimneys. He had no precise destination, only a vague notion of a small riverside town where jobs might be found and rent was cheap. More importantly, it was far enough away that no one would know his name. Kaiser's tail swayed in rhythm with their pace. Each time Charlie veered, the dog shifted effortlessly with him, as if their minds were tuned to the same beat. An old pickup pulled over ahead, and the driver, an elderly man with a silver beard and a baseball cap, leaned out. "Need a lift, son?" Charlie smiled faintly and shook his head. "Thanks, but I'd rather walk." The man nodded, his gaze flicking to Kaiser before driving on. The sun climbed higher, turning Kaiser's fur into a living sculpture of gold and bronze. Charlie's fingers brushed the thick fur at the dog's neck, feeling warmth and solidity. In that moment he knew that whatever came next, he still had this partner. Someone who had marched beside him through war and now would walk with him through the quieter, harsher battles of ordinary life. Ahead, the road bent toward low hills. Charlie drew in the damp, earthy scent of fallen leaves. His stride steadied, his eyes fixed forward. The click of Kaiser's nails on the pavement became the heartbeat of a new journey. One undertaken by two souls who had lost much but still believed somewhere ahead there might be a place to call home. And so they kept walking, man and dog under a pale blue sky, on a road where only the wind and their shared breath broke the silence. By midday, sunlight spilled across the river's surface, scattering into ripples of light, like a great mirror disturbed by a gentle breeze. After hours on foot, Charlie and Kaiser stepped into a small riverside town, the kind that seemed to exist outside of time, wooden houses with steep, shingled roofs and white-trimmed windows. Window boxes spilling over with wild daisies. Small shops with hand-painted signs, weathered but welcoming. Charlie found a bench beneath the curtain of a willow tree near the water's edge. Kaiser lay beside him, head on Charlie's leg, eyes half closed though his ears twitched at every distant sound. The scent of the river mingled with damp wood and the warm, sweet aroma of pastries from a bakery across the street, stirring Charlie's hunger. As he was about to rise in search of food, an older man emerged from the direction of the old docks. He looked to be in his 70s, lean but straight-backed, his thick white hair neatly combed. A well-worn plaid shirt hung over faded khaki trousers, and in his hand he carried an unlit wooden pipe. His steps were slow but sure. He stopped before Charlie, his gaze settling first on Kaiser. "Fine-looking dog," he said in a warm, low voice. "From the way he carries himself, I'd guess you were military." Charlie blinked in mild surprise, then nodded. "Yes, both of us." The man smiled. Something in it suggested he saw more than he let on. "Name's Walter. Been here all my life. There's something I think you might be interested in." Charlie tilted his head, curious. Walter hooked his thumbs in his belt, glancing toward the far end of the riverside road. "See that old tin-sided warehouse? Behind it, there's an old train car. Bought it back when the rail line still ran through here, but never found a use for it. Now I'm too old to fix it up. If you want, I'd let it go cheap." Charlie chuckled softly. "A train car sounds like a joke." "Maybe you think so," Walter replied. "But you should take a look. It has a story of its own." In the old man's eyes, Charlie saw something more than a simple offer to sell. There was an unspoken invitation, as if this were a doorway into a story long forgotten. He hesitated for a moment, then agreed. They walked together along the riverside path, Kaiser trotting between them, part watchful escort, part curious scout. The narrow track led to an open patch of ground where a corrugated metal warehouse stood silent and still. Rust bloomed across its walls, and the door sagged on its hinges, creaking as the wind moved through. Walter pulled the door aside, revealing a short trail behind it, ending at a massive shape half hidden by brush and vines. An old freight car, its once red paint faded to a brick brown, its rust patterns sprawling across the metal, like weathered scars. One sliding door hung slightly ajar, a sliver wide enough to show only darkness and dust within. Charlie stopped and stared. Something about the car held his gaze, as if it had been quietly waiting for someone to wake it. He pressed his palm to the cold steel, feeling the rough paint under his fingertips. Kaiser stepped up too, sniffing at the doorway, as if searching for a scent from long ago. Walter's eyes drifted to the past. It used to carry timber from the northern forests. I bought it thinking I'd turn it into a small workshop, but then my wife passed and my children moved away. So it's been sitting here for 30 years. What's it like inside? Charlie asked. Walter shrugged. See for yourself? Together they forced the sliding door open. The wheels screamed against the track, and dust billowed out in a choking cloud. Inside, thin shafts of light fell through gaps in the roof, catching motes of dust that floated like a field of stars. The old wooden floor had rotted in places, but the thick steel frame still stood firm. In the far corner, a long wooden chest sat buried under a web of cobwebs. Charlie stepped in each board, creaking beneath his weight, the scent of damp timber, old oil and years gone by, hanging heavy in the air. Kaiser padded ahead, nails clicking in steady rhythm. From the doorway, Walter spoke. "It's yours if you want it. I don't need much, only to know someone will bring it back to life." Charlie turned to face him. "I don't know yet what I'd make of it, but..." He looked around again, noticing how the light fell into one bright pool in the center of the car. In his mind, it was already cleaned and restored with glass windows, warm yellow lights, a table and chairs inside. In that vision, Kaiser lay in a corner, his head resting on the lap of someone smiling. "I think I'll take it," he said firmly. Walter nodded as though he had expected this all along. "Good. We'll sort the papers this afternoon. For now. Just let it get used to you." He left them there, man and dog, in the stillness of the old train car. Charlie walked slow circles, letting his hand run along each beam and plank, as if feeling for the faint heartbeat of something that had once lived. He knew this wasn't just scrap metal. It was a beginning, a chance to build something solid again. Kaiser stood at the doorway, tail swaying lightly, his gaze steady and knowing. "If this is where we stay," those eyes seemed to say, "then we will make it our home." Outside, the river glittered under the sun, drifting unhurried toward the horizon. Charlie drew a deep breath, tasting cool water and wind. In his chest, something stirred. Maybe not hope, but something close enough to recognize. And in that moment, he knew his aimless journey had just found its first destination. That afternoon, sunlight slanted through the riverside trees, falling in muted gold streaks across the peeling paint of the freight car. Charlie stood a few paces back, watching the hulking shape lie there, like some old beast in hibernation among the weeds. Up close, the rust had dulled the once deep red to a weary gray-brown. The old painted lines that had once marked its sides were now broken, a network of scars across the steel. Two small windows at the front, one shattered down to a few jagged shards, caught a faint glimmer of light. The wood around them had rotted, the white paint long gone, leaving splintered grain exposed. Charlie laid his hand against the side. Cold, solid. Decades of rain and wind had passed over this steel, but the frame still held strong. The sliding door resisted, groaning and shrieking before it yielded. The smell of damp wood spilled out thick and heavy, like the breath of time held too long. Inside, dim light filtered through the gaps overhead, setting the drifting dust aglow. The wooden floor was patchy with decay, some boards sagging into shallow hollows. In the corners, cobwebs quivered when the breeze reached them. Charlie stepped inside the boards, creaking under his boots, Kaiser close behind, ears pricked, nose testing each shadow. He walked the length of the car, counting his steps, until he came to the long wooden chest. He didn't open it, only brushed away the dust to reveal the weathered wood beneath. The faint resin scent brought back the memory of far-off training camps, where fresh-cut timber was shaped into bunks, tables, and shelves. Turning back, he took in the whole space. It was empty, cold, and marked by time. But that emptiness felt strangely like freedom. Here there would be no doorbells, no curious neighbors, no one to know his past. Only steel wood wind and Kaiser. Walter leaned against the doorway, puffing at a lit pipe. "Well," Charlie exhaled slowly. "I'll take it." The old man nodded, unsurprised. "I figured you would. Cheap price, just enough to fix my porch. The rest, that's for you to decide." Charlie didn't haggle. The price was low, but More than that, this place felt like the right place to begin again, in a town where the name Charlie meant nothing yet. As they stepped outside to talk over the papers, he glanced back. In the fading light, the car no longer looked abandoned. He imagined its windows mended, the rotted boards replaced, warm string lights hanging from the ceiling. A single bed in one corner, Kaiser's bed beside it. A small wooden desk near the door where he could write, read, or just watch the river drift by. It would take work, plenty of it. But he knew this restoring the train car would be like stitching his own life back together. Each hammer strike, each new board would be another piece of faith set into place. Walter handed him the key, an old round lock scuffed and dull, along with a single piece of advice: treat it like a real home and it'll give back. Charlie closed his hand around the key, feeling as though he were holding a fragment of a new future. Kaiser stood beside him, tail swaying, eyes bright with something that looked like excitement. As if the dog knew, too, this was where they would build their life again. When Walter left, Charlie pushed the door open for Kaiser to step inside first. He stood at the threshold, taking in the dim interior, listening to the wind threading through the roof, and smiled. His home, 100 tons of rusted steel, had found its new owner. On his first morning waking in the train car, the newborn light of day slipped through the broken window, scattering into narrow bands across the silvery gray wooden floor. Mist from the river drifted in, curling around the doorway like ribbons of gauze. Kaiser was still curled in the corner, but his ears sprang upright the moment Charlie stirred. Charlie drew in a deep breath of damp wood tinged with the scent of rusted iron and wet earth, a smell both old and startlingly real. Today he intended to begin clearing the place, at least sweeping away the dust and debris, so it could become a space worth staying in. He started from the entrance, moving steadily down the length of the floor, gathering splinters of rotted wood and disintegrating scraps of paper. The dry rasp of the broom echoed through the hollow space. He flung the doors wide to let sunlight and wind rush in, pushing back the clammy darkness. At the far end, in the deepest shadow, his gaze returned to the long wooden chest he had ignored the day before. A thick coat of dust covered it, cobwebs stretching from its lid to the wall. The iron lock was rusted, but still intact. Charlie knelt, pulling a small knife from his pack to pry it open. A sharp snap rang out, and the lid lifted just enough to release a fine burst of dust that made him squint. Kaiser padded closer, sniffing with curious interest, tail giving a light wag. Inside, the first thing he saw was a stack of old railway maps, the paper yellowed and brittle as if ready to crumble. Unfolding one, he found slender lines curling across the region marked with careful handwritten notes. Station names, route numbers, and symbols he did not recognize. Some segments were crossed out, perhaps lines that had long since been shut down. Beneath the maps lay a set of hand tools, a metalworker's hammer pliers, wrenches, and a set of fine engraving chisels. Their wooden handles had been worn smooth from years of use. Charlie picked up the hammer. It felt heavy and solid, as though it could go right back to work, even now. At the bottom of the chest was a thick envelope containing a handwritten letter. The paper was yellowed, the blue ink faded, but still clear. Charlie unfolded it, reading the slow, deliberate strokes aloud in his mind. If you find these things, know that they once belonged to me. Samuel Hayes, station master of the Maplewood Clearwater line. I spent my life seeing trains arrive and depart on time through rain, wind, and blizzards. One day the line was shut down. I kept this car and my tools because I believed that someday someone would find them and give them a new purpose. Every train has a destination, even when it stands still. And sometimes that destination is the person who finds it. Charlie read the last sentence again slowly. Every train has a destination, even when it stands still. The word struck something deep, stirring a feeling he could not name. His chest tightened, and then a faint warmth seeped through. He sat still for a long while, the letter in hand, eyes resting on the narrow shaft of light spilling through the door. In that moment, he thought of himself, a man who had walked away from the past drifting without a map. Maybe like this train car, he too was waiting for a destination, even if he didn't yet know what it was. Carefully, he folded the letter and placed it beside the maps and tools on the small table he had just wiped clean. He would keep them exactly as they were, as part of the car's old soul. Kaiser sat close, watching him intently, as though the dog understood the importance of the find. By afternoon, when the sunlight had withdrawn from the doorway, Charlie began cleaning each item, setting them neatly in their own place. The maps were spread along the wooden wall, pinned with small nails. The tools hung from a steel bar by the door, ready for use. The letter went into a simple glass frame fixed by the window so he would see it every time he came or went. That phrase stayed in his head as evening fell. Every train has a destination, even when it stands still. At some point, he realized he'd begun to believe that he and Kaiser had just stepped aboard such a train, and their journey was only beginning. On the third morning in the car, he woke to the river veiled in mist and dew glittering like silver on the steel frame. Pulling on a coarse work shirt and a pair of worn gloves, he dragged the toolbox outside where the early sun was already touching the rusted walls. Kaiser, as always, sat in the doorway, alert but calm eyes tracking his every movement. The first job was to scrape away the rust built up from decades of weather. With a wire brush, he worked in strong, deliberate strokes, flakes of red-brown falling like dry earth to reveal brighter steel beneath. The harsh rasp of metal on metal joined the chorus of birdsong and leaves shifting in the wind. Sweat dotted his brow within minutes, but each clean patch brought an odd sense of relief. When the sun climbed higher, he began painting the frame. The deep blue paint spread evenly over the steel, covering the old scars, yet leaving the memory of them beneath. Each sweep of the brush felt like adding a new layer of story, one that didn't erase the past, but softened it. Kaiser lay in the doorway, head resting on his front paws, ears still high. Whenever Charlie moved, the dog's gaze followed his tail, sometimes giving a faint wag, as if in quiet encouragement. Now and then, Charlie stopped to scratch behind those ears before returning to work. Between them, no words were needed. Only the steady bond of presence, the kind he had never shared with anyone else. By midday, with the heat pressing in, Charlie moved inside to replace the rotted floorboards. He pried up each nail, the scent of damp wood rising stronger as the boards lifted. Beneath lay fine earth and a few ant nests, a record of the years the place had been left alone. He swept it clean, laid down a moisture barrier, and fixed new planks in place, fresh resin filling the air with its sharp, clean note. Once he paused and leaned against the wall, looking out the window at Kaiser still in his post. Sunlight struck the dog's thick coat, setting aglow the golden-brown fur laced with black, like a cloak both soft and strong. Kaiser's eyes were half closed in contentment, but at the faintest unfamiliar sound, his body tensed ready. By late afternoon, with the light slanting low, Charlie applied the second coat of paint and gave the floor a final wipe. Each stroke of the brush, each nail driven home, seemed to strip away a little more of the neglect, adding a little more warmth. From the outside, the train car no longer looked abandoned. It had begun to resemble a home. When the work was done for the day, Charlie sat on the step of the train car and drank a long gulp of cool water. Kaiser came over, resting his head on Charlie's knee. The sunset washed both the train car and the river in the deep bronze of burnished metal, the wind carrying the scent of fresh-cut wood and the gentle rustle of leaves. Charlie stroked the dog's fur and smiled faintly. "We're doing it, my friend," he murmured, and Kaiser drew in a deep, slow breath, as if in quiet agreement. It was the first day Charlie truly saw the train car as something more than an old hulk of steel. It was beginning to take its place in his and Kaiser's life. That morning, as Charlie was fastening a new plank to the floor near the doorway, an unfamiliar sound drifted into the stillness. At first it was the quick light patter of running feet, then a bright peal of laughter, clear as water striking a still river. He lifted his head, following the sound. Through a gap in the train car's side, he could see a weathered fence, waist-high, dividing the overgrown lot, where the train car stood from a small white-painted house. In its yard, a boy of about 7 was running circles around an apple tree hare in a wild brown tangle, clutching a red ball. Kaiser, who had been lying near the door, instantly rose tail, giving a soft wag. The boy noticed him, eyes lighting up. "Whose dog is that?" he called over the fence, his voice bubbling with curiosity and excitement. Charlie braced his hand on his knee and stood. "Mine. His name's Kaiser." "Kaiser," the boy repeated, eyes wide. "Can I come closer?" Before Charlie could answer, a woman's voice came from the porch, Jamie. "Don't bother the new neighbor." She stepped into view. A simple beige dress hair, tied neatly back, warm brown eyes touched with caution. Charlie dipped his head in a small greeting. "It's all right. Kaiser really likes children." She smiled faintly, but stayed on the porch, watching. Jamie had already reached the fence, small hands hooked through the slats. Kaiser approached, lowering his head so the boy could reach through the gap. As Jamie's fingers sank into the warm fur, Kaiser drew a slow breath, then licked gently. The boy's laugh rang out, pure and unguarded. Charlie realized that sound filled the neglected yard with a new kind of life. "He's huge," Jamie said, never taking his eyes from the dog. "Can he do tricks?" Charlie smiled and gave a short whistle. Kaiser sat at once, then extended one paw. Jamie laughed again, gripping the paw in a handshake. From the porch, Clara, the boy's mother, smiled as well, the edge of her wariness softening. They exchanged a few words over the fence. Charlie learned Clara taught at the town's elementary school, and that she and Jamie had moved in after her mother passed away. The White House had been part of the inheritance. "Can you come over sometime with Kaiser?" Jamie asked eagerly. Charlie hesitated, then nodded, "Sure. But Kaiser will have to get brushed first, so he doesn't track dirt onto your porch." Jamie nodded hard, as if sealing an important promise. Kaiser stayed by Charlie's side, ears twitching whenever the boy laughed. When mother and son went inside, Charlie leaned against the doorway, watching. The morning sun cast patches of light through the fence onto the earth, mingling with the shadow of Kaiser at his feet. That laughter still echoed in his head, a simple sound that somehow carried a promise that life here would not be all quiet days. Charlie reached down to ruffle Kaiser's head. "Looks like we've made a new friend." The dog tilted his head and wagged his tail as if agreeing. That day, for the first time, Charlie felt the train car was not just shelter, but the beginning of a connection. With a curious boy, a warm-hearted mother, and the voices from just beyond the fence. By afternoon, the clear blue sky had turned to a heavy ashen gray. Thick clouds rolled in from the distance, so low they seemed within reach. Sitting on the step with Kaiser, Charlie caught the change in the wind and the scent of damp soil and water. Rain was coming. He rose quickly, gathering the tools still outside, the wire brush, the paint can, a few planks of wood. Kaiser stayed close, glancing up at the sky with ears high, as if sensing exactly what was coming. Within minutes, the rain broke. Heavy drops struck the roof with dull thuds before swelling into a roaring white curtain. Wind screamed through the gaps, flinging water inside. Charlie shut the main door tight, but soon heard the telltale tap, tap, tap from near the bed, the sound of a leak. Crossing the floor, he found a small hole in the roof, letting rainwater spill down, pooling on the new floorboards. "Not good, Kaiser," he muttered, dragging a tarp from under the bed. In the glow of the small yellow lamp, the two friends worked against the storm. Charlie climbed onto a chair to secure the tarp over the leak, while Kaiser stood below, eyes fixed upward. Whenever Charlie motioned for something, a rope, a tool, Kaiser fetched it immediately, the instinct from training days, still sharp. The wind drove rain hard against them, soaking Charlie's shirt until it clung to him. His hair plastered to his forehead, but his hand stayed steady as he tied the last knot. After nearly half an hour, the dripping stopped. He dropped into the chair with a sigh, glancing at Kaiser, who shook his coat vigorously, sending droplets flying. "Well done, Kaiser," Charlie murmured, rubbing the dog down with a towel. Kaiser pressed his head into Charlie's hand, brown eyes glinting in the dim light. Outside, the rain hammered the roof in a steady, distant drumbeat. Charlie spread a thick blanket in the driest corner beside the bed and settled there with Kaiser. On the small gas stove, he heated water, the scent of black tea rising into the warm air, pushing away the lingering smell of wet steel. When he took his first sip, he noticed Kaiser lying close, head resting on his leg, eyes half closed. In the soft lamplight, their breaths matched, slow and even. Neither spoke nor needed to. Outside, the wind and rain wove a mournful rhythm, but inside the train car, another feeling was growing. One that wrapped itself around them both safety. That night, Charlie leaned back against the wall, one hand resting on Kaiser's back, letting the sound of the rain and the dog's warmth draw him into sleep. Even in the haze before dreams took him, he remembered the way the yellow lamplight glowed against the new deep blue paint, and he understood that from now on, this place would be home, no matter how hard the storms raged outside. By late afternoon the next day, the sun stretched low over the river, its light reflecting off the fresh blue paint of the train car. Charlie was stacking the leftover planks when the patter of quick footsteps came from the fence. Kaiser looked up, first ear's pricked tail wagging in a slow arc. "Mr. Charlie. Mr. Charlie, I brought a hammer." Jamie's head popped up over the fence, a small worn-handled hammer in his hand, and a grin as bright as the sunlight spilling across the yard. Charlie chuckled. "Planning to help again?" "All right, but you follow the rules." A few minutes later, Jamie was inside the yard, his baseball cap tilted a little to one side. He followed Charlie into the train car where fresh planks lay waiting to be fixed in place. Charlie handed him a nail, showing him how to stand it upright between two fingers and tap it in with steady, measured blows. The first few strikes landed off-center, but soon Jamie drove his first nail without bending it. "Good work," Charlie said while Kaiser moved closer, sitting like an attentive spectator. In the afternoons that followed, the scene became routine. Charlie taught Jamie how to brush paint evenly, without leaving streaks, how to smooth the wood with fine-grained sandpaper. The boy worked with a quiet eagerness, paint smudging his fingers, eyes glowing with pride whenever a section was finished. One day, while they were painting a window frame, Clara's voice called from outside. "You two should take a break." She stepped in with a tray of warm pastries and 2 paper cups, coffee for Charlie, warm milk for Jamie. The smell of the pastries mingled with the scent of fresh wood and still warm paint, forming something that felt like the fragrance of home. Charlie accepted the tray with a small nod of thanks. Clara's gaze lingered on the newly painted frame before she glanced down at Kaiser standing by her feet. "Good dog," she murmured, bending to stroke his head. Afternoons filled with the sound of hammering soon became a habit, not just repairs, but moments shared between 3 people and 1 dog. Jamie talked about his new school and backyard soccer matches, Charlie offered bits of his service days and the trains he'd once ridden, and Clara spoke little but always with a warmth that slowed the air around them. Even on days when the sky turned gray and the wind picked up, the group stayed inside the train car, the sound of hammer strikes blending with Jamie's laughter. Charlie realized those sounds had begun to replace the heavy silence he'd carried when he first arrived. Every strike felt like a slow, steady heartbeat, bringing life back into the space. When the sun slipped behind the trees and turned the doorway's paint to warm bronze, Charlie walked Jamie and Clara to the gate. Kaiser stayed close, tail swaying. Before leaving, Jamie called back over his shoulder, "I'll be here tomorrow." Charlie smiled and nodded. He already knew there would be more hammering, more brushstrokes, more laughter. The small sounds of a life being rebuilt. From the day Charlie arrived, his deep blue train car had sat quietly on the riverside lot, a strange piece of steel in the town's calm landscape. But when the hammer blows, brush swipes, and children's laughter began to rise each afternoon, people started to notice. At the cafe on the corner, old men lingered over their tea and remarked, "They say he's an ex-soldier, lives with a dog as big as a calf." Another would add, "That old train car he bought, no one else would have touched it." But now it's starting to look good. Stories spread, each retelling, adding a little more embroidery. Some said Charlie was a railway relic hunter, others that he'd once saved his unit with the help of that giant dog. No one agreed on the truth, but curiosity grew. One weekend afternoon, while Charlie was replacing a broken window pane, Kaiser's ears shot up, eyes fixed on the gate. Two boys of about 10 hovered outside the fence, whispering before breaking into giggles. "Need something," Charlie called, voice calm. "We just wanted to see the dog," one answered shyly. At the mention of his name, Kaiser stepped forward, standing quietly at Charlie's side. Warm brown eyes, steady. The boys froze for a moment at his size. But when Kaiser approached, sat, and wagged his tail gently, the tension melted. "All right, come on," Charlie said, gesturing them over. Soon the boys were running their hands through Kaiser's thick coat, firing questions. "What does he eat? Can he catch a ball? Where does he sleep?" Charlie answered, each one a faint smile tugging at his lips. The moment reminded him of nights in the barracks, comrades gathered around the fire listening to his stories. The tale of the stranger's train car, and the giant dog spread faster after that. Shoppers passing by peeked through the fence. An old woman stopped to ask about the renovations. A local carpenter offered to lend Charlie extra tools. That evening, Clara arrived with a basket of pastries and a teasing smile. "You're becoming the talk of the town." Charlie shrugged, though inside there was a quiet warmth. He had planned to live here unnoticed, avoiding attention. But the curiosity of others felt less intrusive than he'd feared. It felt like a door quietly opening, inviting him into a new community. As the sun set, painting the river amber, Charlie stood on the train car's step with Kaiser beside him, watching silhouettes pass along the road. Now and then, someone lifted a hand in greeting, and he found himself raising his own in return. From whispered rumors, a fragile but real connection was forming, enough to anchor him here. Night fell slowly, casting the riverside town in a gentle blue-violet. From the narrow road leading to the water, the full moon rose, its reflection trembling in silver ribbons across the surface. The chorus of insects mingled with the soft lapping of the current, creating a low, steady music for the quiet evening. Charlie and Jamie sat on an old wooden bench Charlie had built the week before. Beside them lay Kaiser, stretched out with his head on Charlie's leg, ears alert to every sound. Under the moonlight, his thick fur shimmered with silvered highlights. "Mr. Charlie," Jamie said suddenly, voice hesitant but edged with curiosity. "When you were a soldier, did you save a lot of people?" Charlie stayed silent for a few seconds, eyes fixed on the river. Its surface stirred memories of other shores, faraway places where the sound of waves mixed with the thump of helicopter blades and the shouts of voices in the dark. "There's one mission." He began, his voice lowering, "I'll never forget. We got word that a group of civilians was trapped in a valley after a landslide. The road in was blocked. You could only reach them through a narrow path along the mountainside." Jamie leaned forward, wide-eyed, hanging on every word. Charlie's hand rested unconsciously on Kaiser's back. Back then, Kaiser and I had only been working together a few months. But when the order came, I knew we could do it. The path was dangerous, slick with mud and rock, but Kaiser kept just a few steps ahead, scenting and finding the safest route. He paused to take a sip from the tin cup beside him, the faint aroma of tea mingling with the cool river air. We found them in the end. They were exhausted, shivering from the cold, but alive. Kaiser found a little girl pinned under a wooden beam, just from the faint sound of her breath. Without him, she might have... Charlie left the thought unfinished. Jamie clutched his cup of milk a little tighter, eyes bright with admiration. "You're like a hero," he murmured. Charlie chuckled and shook his head. "The real hero is Kaiser. I was just the one following him." Kaiser lifted his head as if sensing the praise and pressed closer to Charlie's leg. Moonlight glinted in his eyes like two tiny flames. They sat together a while longer, listening only to the river and the whisper of leaves. Charlie could feel Kaiser's warmth against him, his breathing steady, like a second heartbeat alongside his own. In that moment, the distance between the smoke-filled past and the quiet present felt bridged by an invisible thread. "Can you tell me the rest tomorrow?" Jamie asked, hopeful, as he stood to leave. Charlie nodded, watching the boy disappear beyond the fence. On the riverbank, Kaiser remained seated beside him, gaze turned toward the silver moon. Charlie knew that tonight he would sleep soundly, because even the heaviest memories felt lighter when shared under the moon and in the silent company of a four-legged friend. The next morning, the sky over the town was pale with early light dew still clinging to the riverside trees. Charlie sat on the train car's step with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Kaiser stretched beside him, head resting on his foot, eyes half closed in quiet contentment. A light breeze carried the damp scent of soil and the sweetness of wildflowers from the riverbank. But within seconds, Charlie's brow furrowed. Beneath it was something else, dry, acrid. He drew in another breath, and this time the smell of smoke was clear. Kaiser's head came up at almost the same moment, ears high, eyes fixed toward the far woods. Charlie set the cup aside and stood. He knew that smell. It wasn't trash fires or cooking charcoal. It was the burn of dry leaves and timber, a scent he had known too many times in his rescue days, and it never meant anything good. From the train car's doorway, he scanned west toward the rolling hills. At first the sky was still clean, but then halfway up a distant slope, a thin gray ribbon began to rise, curling and spreading with the wind. "Kaiser," he said quietly. The dog stood square legs, firm, eyes locked on the forest. His instincts were awake now. Just as they'd been in the field, Charlie stepped inside to grab the binoculars hanging by the door. Through the glass, he could see it more clearly. Smoke lifting from scattered points, as if the fire was creeping through patches of dry undergrowth. It was far, but the urgency behind it was unmistakable. On the road into town, a few townsfolk had already stopped pointing toward the forest. Voices buzzed in uneasy conversation while birds wheeled overhead, fleeing the area. That old reflex stirred in Charlie's chest, the weight of urgency pressing in. He lowered the binoculars and glanced at Kaiser. "We need to be ready." He didn't have to explain. Kaiser was already moving at his side as he reached for the old field pack, kept stocked with the Essentials flashlight, multi-tool rope first aid kit. Outside, the wind picked up, curling the smoke into thick, twisting arms reaching toward the town's sky. Charlie knew that once the wind shifted, the fire's behavior could change in an instant. He looked back at the train car, the home he had rebuilt board by board, the scent of its wood still familiar. Now it stood under the shadow of a threat that was drawing closer with every breath. Kaiser moved ahead, stopping at the edge of the yard, nose pointed toward the forest, eyes bright with alertness. Charlie joined him, placing a hand on the dog's back. "Steady, my friend. We'll be ready." The smoke in the wind was thicker now, harsher. The town's alarm had not yet rung. But Charlie knew this was no moment to take lightly. A small fire could consume a forest in hours, and when it did, nothing would be the same. He drew a long breath, eyes on the smoke-blurred horizon. Somewhere deep inside, the part of him that had once been a rescuer was rising again, ready for whatever came. By that afternoon, the sky above the town was no longer morning blue. Heavy bands of smoke stretched across the horizon, twisted by the wind into dark, churning waves. The smell was sharper now, dry and biting in the lungs. Charlie stood on the train car's step, eyes fixed on the dense black clouds pushing closer. He'd seen wildfires before, but rarely ones that spread with this speed. The wind had turned, blowing hard from the southwest, feeding the flames. The town's alarm bell began to toll its clang, joined by the wail of fire truck sirens and the shouts of voices in the streets. Kaiser stood tight at his side, body taut, ears forward, gaze locked on the burning ridge. Then hurried footsteps pounded against the earth. Clara burst into view, face pale, breath ragged. "Charlie, Jamie. I can't reach him." Her voice shook. "He said he was going to the edge of the forest with a friend to watch the fire, but I haven't heard from him since. I've looked everywhere near the house." Charlie didn't wait for more. He swung the pack over his shoulder and signaled Kaiser. "Move." The dog shot forward like an arrow, and Charlie followed down the narrow road toward the smoke. The closer they came to the woods, the thicker and hotter the air grew. Ash fell in soft flakes, laced with the acrid stench of burning leaves. The wind roared through the trees ahead, carrying the splintering crack of breaking branches and the sharp, snapping hiss of flames, finding fresh fuel. Charlie bent low, wrapping a wet cloth over his nose and mouth. "Kaiser! Find Jamie," he shouted. The dog lowered his head instantly, nostrils working, paws steady even on the uneven, ash-coated ground. They followed a narrow trail, but within minutes, fire had flared ahead, closing in as a glowing red wall. Charlie had to swing wide, searching for any break, while his eyes scanned desperately for the boy. Through the choking haze, Kaiser suddenly froze, gave a low growl, then veered northeast. Charlie didn't hesitate. He pushed through low brush, ducked under a fallen branch, ash clinging to his jacket and to Kaiser's fur. Then came the sound. Harsh, racking coughs. Charlie lunged forward to find Jamie huddled at the base of a tree, eyes stinging from the smoke, his face streaked with soot. "Jamie," Charlie called, hauling him to his feet. Kaiser closed in tight, using his body as a shield against the wind, and Sparks, his eyes constantly sweeping for any sudden flare. Charlie tied the wet cloth over Jamie's nose and mouth, pulled the boy close, and signaled the retreat. The way back was worse. Fire had spread across the ground in snapping, dancing sheets, the wind urging it forward. Kaiser led, finding safe pockets between the flames, pausing only to make sure Charlie and Jamie could keep up. They broke into a clearing near the river, cool air rushing in. Jamie coughed hard, but the panic in his eyes was already fading. Clara was there, running forward to gather her son in a fierce, tearful embrace. Charlie stepped back, one hand on Kaiser's back, feeling the dog's breath, fast but steady. The ring of fire roared beyond its reflection, turning the river into a band of molten red. But for now, they were safe. And Charlie knew this was only the start of a long night. The wind whipped hard, carrying heat and flinging glowing embers overhead. The forest had become a maze of fire, the crackle of burning wood merging with the wind's howl into a sound like some vast, angry growl. Charlie gripped Jamie's hand tighter, pushing him forward, until the boy suddenly stopped. "Wait," he gasped, bending down. In his small arms, a soot-gray kitten trembled violently, eyes wide with fear. Charlie felt a jolt of surprise, but didn't question it. In this ring of fire, Jamie still held tight to the tiny life as if nothing else mattered. Charlie laid a hand on his shoulder, gave a quick nod. "Hold on to it." Up ahead, Kaiser looked back, barked once, then forged east, toward thinner smoke. He had chosen their way out. They followed, but within yards, a new tongue of fire leapt from the left, blocking the path. The wind had shifted too fast. Charlie yanked off his jacket, soaked it from his canteen, and wrapped it around his arm. "Kaiser, swing right," he shouted, beating the jacket down on the licking flames, carving a narrow corridor. Jamie hugged the kitten to his chest, ducking low as he slipped through. Charlie came last, batting aside sparks with the wet fabric heat searing his face, sweat and water mingling down his arm. Kaiser led them down a sloping cut in the earth where the wind blew against the fire, slowing its spread. Their feet slid on the dirt and ash, every stride an effort not to fall. The murmur of the river grew clearer. Safety was close. They burst from the last trees, the glare of the flames giving way to silver light rippling over the water. Cool air swept around them, letting them breathe deeply for the first time in minutes. On the riverbank, Charlie knelt, hand on Kaiser's back. The dog panted hard, tongue lolling, but his eyes were still bright, still watchful. Jamie clutched the kitten, his hands shaking but his gaze steady. "I couldn't leave it," he whispered. Charlie's smile was weary, but sure. "And you were right." Behind them, the fire's reflection writhed across the water. From far off came the wail of fire trucks mingling with the steady rush of the current, a strange mix of chaos and relief, the sound of having stepped clear of the flames at the last possible moment. Charlie felt the truth settle in him sometimes, in the grip of danger. It's the smallest things. A life cradled in your arms, a hand you refuse to let go, the look in someone's eyes, that give you the reason to fight your way back into the light. By morning, sunlight lay soft and gold over the rooftops, but the riverside town's peace was gone. Thin ribbons of smoke still clung to the horizon, the air carrying the tang of ash and scorched timber. Sirens' voices calling and the collapse of weakened beams echoed from all directions. Charlie stood before the train car, coffee warming his hands, gazing toward the road into town. Kaiser sat beside him, ears high, eyes following the passing clusters of people. Both still wore the dust and smoke of the night before. News of how Charlie and Kaiser had found Jamie had swept through the town overnight. Those who passed stopped to nod, some stepping close for a handshake. Sometimes firm and silent, sometimes paired with a look that said more than words. Clara arrived mid-morning, a basket of still warm pastries in hand. Her eyes were rimmed red, but her face was lit with relief. I can't thank you enough," she began, her voice unsteady. "If it hadn't been for you and Kaiser, why—" She left it unfinished, but Charlie understood. He only shook his head, smiling slightly, and glanced toward Kaiser. The dog lifted his head and wagged his tail as if he too understood the weight of the moment. Jamie came running, the kitten wrapped in a soft cloth. He dropped to his knees, hugging Kaiser, his laughter bright and unguarded. "I told my friends at school Kaiser's a superhero. And you too." Mr. Charlie laughed, ruffling the boy's hair before leaning back so Kaiser could soak in the affection. He knew that for Jamie, last night was more than an escape. It was a story he'd carry for life about courage and the unshakable bond between them. That afternoon, the town gathered in the community center yard. People brought food, water, and their own versions of the night's events. When Charlie and Kaiser arrived, every head turned. Someone began to clap, and the sound spread, rolling into a long, steady applause that wrapped around them like a tide. The mayor stepped forward, presenting Charlie with a framed certificate of merit, along with a new collar for Kaiser, a brass tag engraved with the words, "Always faithful. Forever part of this town." Charlie knelt, fastening it around Kaiser's neck, feeling an unfamiliar warmth rise in his chest. That afternoon, when the crowd had thinned, Charlie and Kaiser returned to the train car. They sat on the wooden step out front, gazing at the river where sunlight still glittered in shifting ripples. In the distance, Jamie played with a small group of children, the gray kitten trotting behind him. Clara stood by the fence, smiling her eyes, carrying a silent thank you toward Charlie. He exhaled softly, resting his hand on Kaiser's back. He knew the fire had left scars on this land, but it had also left something else connection. And in his own heart, something new had begun to take root. Perhaps at last this place was becoming home. That night, with the town wrapped in quiet, Charlie sat alone at the small wooden table inside the car. The yellow lamplight spilled over the tabletop, a warm circle in the midst of the faint scents of fresh timber and lingering paint. Kaiser lay near the doorway, head on his forepaws, ears tilted in a half-alert, half-restful way. In front of Charlie lay a newly printed photograph, he and Kaiser standing in front of the restored train car. Fresh paint gleaming in the sun, the entry steps clean and solid. He hadn't taken it to show off but to mark a moment, to prove to himself that he had stood back up after days when it felt like there was nothing left. Beside the photo sat a blank sheet of paper. He picked up his pen, but the tip hovered for long moments without touching the page. Too many times in the past, he had meant to write to Lily, his daughter unseen for years, only to tear the letter up or shove it into a drawer never opened again. Outside, the river wind whispered through the trees, bringing in a cool dampness. Charlie sipped the last of his coffee, now lukewarm, and stared through the window, picturing the little girl she had once been. Soft curls, bright eyes like sunlight, and a smile he had once believed would stay with him forever. But war distance and his own wrong turns had carved a hollow he didn't know how to fill. He drew in a breath and let the pen touch paper. The first word was the hardest, but the rest followed. Slowly, steadily, my daughter. I don't know where to begin. Maybe you'll be surprised to get this letter. Maybe you won't want to read it. But I hope you'll know at least that I am still here and I still think of you. I've found a new place, a small old train car in a riverside town. It's not big, not fancy, but it's warm enough for me and Kaiser, the dog who's been with me through all these years, to call it home. I'm sending you a photograph. If you want to, you can come here. I'll be standing at the door any day you arrive. When the last line was written, Charlie sat still for a while as if testing whether he truly meant to send it. His hand rested on the photo, the thin, cool paper feeling as heavy as stone. Kaiser rose, patted over, and set his muzzle on Charlie's knee. Charlie smiled faintly, stroking the dog's head. What do you think, Kaiser? Should we send it? The dog answered with a quick lick to his hand, then settled in closer. An answer as clear as words. Charlie slipped the letter and photo into a thick envelope, writing the name and address he had carried in his memory for years. The next morning, with mist still hanging over the river, he pulled on his jacket, tucked the envelope into his canvas bag, and walked with Kaiser down the road to the post office. The post clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, took the envelope and stamped it. When she looked up, Charlie only smiled, nodded, and turned to leave. Walking back over the gravel road, he felt strangely lighter, though a faint, nameless unease still shadowed him. Maybe Lily would never reply. Maybe the letter would be forgotten. But maybe, just maybe, one day she would be standing at the door of this train car, and he would hear the word Dad again. That night, sitting on the step with the moonlight shimmering across the river, Kaiser lay with his head on the wooden plank, both of them silent. Charlie knew the hope he had sent off was like a small light on a distant horizon, faint but enough to wait for. Mornings in the riverside town carried a gentler kind of light. The sun had yet to rise fully. The first rays brushed the water, turning each ripple into a thread of silver. The air was cool, scented with dewy grass and the faint dampness of the train car's old wood. Charlie sat on the front step, with a steaming mug of coffee. The heat seeped into his calloused hands. He sipped slowly, letting the faint bitterness and ghost of sweetness roll over his tongue. This was his favorite part of the day, when the town was not yet fully awake and every sound was soft enough that he could hear his own heartbeat. Kaiser lay stretched beside him, chin resting on the step, eyes half closed but ears twitching at the flutter of a sparrow or the splash of an oar somewhere downstream. His solid frame radiated a familiar warmth, one Charlie had leaned on through the hardest years. Glancing sideways, Charlie chuckled at the dog's slow, steady breathing. "You might be enjoying this morning even more than I am," he murmured, turning his gaze back to the river. Inside him now was no longer the heavy, gnawing emptiness of before, but a stillness that came from knowing he was where he was meant to be. From the far end of the dirt road into town, there were still no passers-by. A rooster's call drifted from behind a house, and somewhere the scent of toasting bread curled through the air. Charlie rolled the mug between his palms, letting his thoughts wander. To the letter he had sent to Lily, to the fragile chance that she might read it. Part of him wanted to believe, part of him feared hope too much to trust it. But this morning he set that aside, letting the peace linger. Then Kaiser's head lifted, ears pricking sharply, gaze fixed down the road. Charlie set his mug down and squinted. A figure was approaching, slight with loose hair falling over her shoulders, a faded green backpack on her back. Her steps were unhurried but certain. And though she was still far off, Charlie felt that each one carried a story untold. His heartbeat quickened. He could not yet see her face, but a strange, familiar pull moved through his veins. Kaiser stood tail swaying slowly, as if his instincts had already guessed what was coming. The stranger stopped a few meters from the train car. In the pale morning light, Charlie could see her more clearly. Bright eyes tinged with uncertainty, fingers gripping the straps of her backpack. For a few suspended seconds, neither moved, as if time itself had slowed. Kaiser took a single step forward, then glanced back at Charlie, waiting for a cue. Charlie drew a deep breath, set down his coffee, and rose to his feet. A question pounded inside his chest, but his lips stayed silent. The quiet morning on the wooden step had just opened a door to a meeting he hadn't known would come, yet felt as though he'd been waiting for it for a very long time. And in that instant, when the first ray of sun touched her hair, Charlie knew this morning would not be like any before. The dirt road from the bus stop still glistened with dew. Faint tire tracks pressed into the soft earth, a reminder that someone had arrived from far away. Charlie stayed where he was, eyes fixed on the figure approaching. Each step seemed to etch a faster beat into his heart. As she drew closer, the morning light revealed more soft brown hair tousled by wind, a face leaner than he remembered. But the eyes he had last seen when cradling a months-old baby. Now they were older, deeper, carrying both caution and confusion. Lily. Her name rang in his mind like a sound long suppressed. For a heartbeat, he didn't know whether to smile or cry, to step forward or stay still. The years apart, the letters never sent the fear that he had lost her forever. All of it surged back at once, tightening his throat. Lily stopped a few meters away, hands still clutching her bag. Straps, eyes searching his face for something. Perhaps a glimmer of familiarity, perhaps an answer to years without a word. Silence hung between them. The river lapped softly at the shore. Birds chattered in the trees, background music to the space separating father and daughter. It was Kaiser who broke the moment. He sprang up from the step, gave a short, sure bark, as if confirming what he already knew, then bounded down to her tail, whipping eyes bright like he'd found an old friend. Lily hesitated a moment, then a faint smile curved her lips as Kaiser pressed close, lifting his head for a pat. Her hand hovered uncertain before settling into the thick warmth of his fur. "You "You're Kaiser?" she asked, her voice trembling as though naming a piece of memory she'd never touched before. Charlie stood on the step, chest tight. He felt a wave of gratitude toward the dog. Kaiser had just done what he himself didn't know how to begin open the door. He stepped down a few rungs, his voice rough but warm. "Did you come in on the early bus?" Lily lifted her eyes to his, and for a moment, Charlie saw a reflection of the childhood he'd missed. She gave a small nod, an admission, a first thread between them. There was still distance. More than the few meters of earth, the distance of years apart. But that morning, with mist in her hair and Kaiser's warmth in her hand, the space had closed, if only by a single step. Charlie drew in another breath, knowing this couldn't be rushed. But today, Lily was here. And that for him was the greatest gift since he'd first set foot in this town. That morning, sunlight spread evenly across the train car's weathered paint, glinting off patches of rust like fragments of old memory. Charlie stood by the steel frame with a paintbrush in hand, while Lily, her hair tied back, white shirt already smudged with color, stood beside him, learning to dip her brush into a freshly opened tin. The scent of paint mingled with damp wood and river breeze, forming an unfamiliar but comforting fragrance, like a quiet promise of change. "Brush along the grain," Charlie reminded gently, watching her work while keeping his tone steady. "Yes," Lily murmured, her eyes fixed on each stroke. She didn't speak much, but in every nod, Charlie sensed genuine focus. They both knew this was more than repainting a train car. It was repainting a part of memory left to fade. Kaiser sat at the bottom of the steps, amber eyes tracking each of their movements. Now and then, he rose, pacing between them, as if to ensure they kept the same rhythm. Whenever Charlie passed her a tin of nails or traded brushes, Kaiser would slip in between, leaning into Lily before glancing back at Charlie as though saying, "I'm here. It's going to be fine." Those days, the distance between father and daughter narrowed. Not through long conversations, but through the steady scrape of brush on wood and the silences that no longer felt heavy. Once Lily asked, "Have you lived here long?" Charlie answered, "Not long, but long enough to know I want to stay." The simple reply made her smile, and that smile felt to Charlie like finishing a long-neglected patch of timber in his heart. At midday, Clara stopped by with a basket of pastries and a jug of lemon tea. "You two look more alike than I expected," she teased, setting the basket down. Lily flushed, smiling shyly. Charlie simply nodded. Kaiser sprawled in the dirt ears, still alert to every sound. By afternoon, the second coat was dry. Sunlight streamed through a newly glazed window, casting a warm rectangle inside the car. Charlie stepped back, watching Lily framed in the light paint on her hands, but her face bright. He knew it wasn't just the train car being restored. It was him and the bond between them. On the final day of painting, Lily knelt to draw a small outline near the door, a seated dog with the name Kaiser written in soft, looping script. Charlie stood silent, throat tight. Kaiser came over to sniff the fresh mark, then sneezed, making them both laugh. By sunset, the new paint caught the gold light, making the train car look like a true home. And in that scene, Charlie, Lily, and Kaiser stood together. A picture unfinished, but already warm enough to promise the days ahead. The next dawn, the river lay still as glass holding the pink reflection of sunrise. Hanging from the front of the refurbished train car, a wooden sign swayed gently, "Harbor Light." Charlie had chosen the name because he wanted this place to be a mooring for anyone who'd felt lost, just as he had been. Until Kaiser and the people who had stepped into his life helped him find a shore again. Inside, the aroma of fresh roasted coffee mingled with the sweetness of just-baked pastries, filling the air with a warmth that wrapped around anyone who stepped in. Small wooden tables sat beside the windows, their chairs hand-built from old pine. The steel frames along the walls of the train car remained untouched, but a fresh coat of paint softened their age, preserving the nostalgia while adding a clean, welcoming feel. On a shelf, Charlie had arranged treasures from the mysterious wooden chest, a brass oil lamp, a few time-worn railway maps. as if quietly letting the place tell its own history. Kaiser sat by the door, the small bell on his collar, chiming softly whenever someone entered. His ears stood high, his gaze calm yet alert, like a friendly sentinel keeping watch. The first to arrive were Clara and Jamie. The boy bounded in ruffling Kaiser's head before exclaiming, "It looks so different, I still remember painting this with you." Clara smiled, setting a basket of pastries on the counter. "Consider it a little gift for this special day." Gradually, the townsfolk began to trickle in. The elderly bookseller brought a stack of rare volumes for the reading nook. The florist arrived with a vase of bright yellow chrysanthemums. A group of students stopped by after school for lemonade, settling beneath the shade of the tree outside to talk and laugh. Each voice, each burst of laughter seemed to lay another fresh coat of color over a town that had been quiet for far too long. Charlie moved easily from table to table, pouring coffee, greeting guests, but his eyes often found Lily. She was behind the counter today, cheeks flushed from the work, her voice clear, her gaze bright. He realized she was no longer the shy girl who had first stepped off the bus. Harbor Light wasn't just the place where he had begun again. It was where she had found her own footing. By afternoon, a breeze from the river drifted in, carrying the scent of water and maple leaves. The door stood wide open, and people gathered around the long central table. Some shared stories of winters when snow blanketed the rooftops. Others recalled the flood that once sent the whole town into evacuation. Charlie listened, adding a word or two now and then, feeling as though he had always belonged here. When the sun began to sink, golden light poured through the windows, casting a warm glow over every animated face. Kaiser lay at the doorway, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but ears tuned to every sound. Beside him, Charlie sipped his coffee, the taste mingling with a feeling he hadn't known in years. Peaceful, whole, and rooted. That night, Harbor Light shone not only from its hanging lamps, but from the stories shared, the people gathered, and the steady, quiet heartbeat of a German shepherd at the door. The evening sun sank slowly, as though reluctant to leave spilling gold across the river like a silken carpet. The water drifted lazily, mirroring streaks of rose and violet clouds, turning the whole scene into a painting warmed by its own light. Waves lapped gently at the wooden dock. Birds called to each other in the soft wind. Nature's quiet orchestra played on. Charlie, Lily, and Kaiser sat on the wooden steps in front of the train car. Now a safe harbor, not just for a man and his dog, but for a family. Charlie held a cooling cup of coffee, not bothering to drink. His gaze rested on the water, distant yet calm. Beside him, Lily propped her chin on her knees, her long dark hair catching threads of the sunset's gold. Kaiser lay between them, head on Lily's lap, eyes half closed as if savoring each passing breeze. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, his warm breath bringing a small smile to Lily's lips. She stroked his thick coat, amber gold streaked with deep black, feeling in its softness the solid weight of an unspoken promise that no matter the storms, this shore would always welcome them home. "Do you think we'll stay here forever?" Lily asked, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. Charlie turned toward her, meeting the gaze that waited for his answer. He didn't speak right away, just reached down to rub Kaiser's head before saying, "I think this place is already our home." Lily's slight nod and faint smile were all the confirmation he needed. In the amber light, memories of the beginning returned. Rusted steel, leaky roofs in the rain, cold mornings over a steaming cup. They came like slow spinning film reels, all leading to this three souls, sitting together saying little, yet entirely understood. A river breeze drifted past, carrying the scent of water and wildflowers from the bank. Kaiser opened his eyes, lifting his head as if to imprint the moment. Charlie and Lily followed his gaze toward the horizon, where the sun sank, leaving behind a last ribbon of light like a golden stitch sewing the day closed. On the steps, 3 silhouettes, 2 human, 1 dog, stretched long across the earth, fading into the orange and gold. No spoken promise was needed. They all knew Harbor Light was no longer just a riverside cafe, but the anchor for their hearts, forever. The story of Charlie, Lily, and Kaiser closed in the glow of a riverside sunset, yet its echo lingered like a slow, steady heartbeat. Through loss and change, a German shepherd had become the bridge, binding together lives once fractured. Kaiser was not only a steadfast companion, but a living emblem of loyalty, courage, and unconditional love. The very gifts his breed has given to countless people over time. German shepherds are celebrated for their intelligence and strength. But what makes them truly extraordinary isn't just their skill in guarding or working. It's their quiet ability to sense pain, to share joy, and to be the unshakable ground beneath those who need it. Step by step beside Charlie, head resting on Lily's lap, Kaiser proved that love needs no words, only presence. This story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful healing comes from friends who never say goodbye. Beings who love with a whole heart without condition or limit. Every dog, every animal deserves to live within that circle of care and respect. And just as Harbor Light became a safe mooring for souls once adrift, each of us can be that light for someone, or for a dog in need of a home. Because love once given always finds its way back, soft and certain as tonight's sunset.